Hello, welcome to the LaRouche PAC Weekly Report for July the 11th, 2012. I'm John Hofel, and joining me in the studio today are Cody Jones and Jason Ross of The Basement, and Lyndon LaRouche. Good morning, Lynn.
One thing to keep in mind, and as we discuss these two sets of issues that are going to be discussed here today, keep in mind the fact that what has hit the shores of the Atlantic on our side now is the LIBOR crisis. Most Americans have not known what the meaning of LIBOR crisis is. They were going to find out that, for example, Mr. Geithner of infamy is part of the LIBOR problem. And what's going to happen now, we have the greatest crisis, financial crisis, in modern history because of the implications of the crisis, as much as the content, is hitting the transatlantic region with increasing force now. It's gone to gale winds, and it's going to go further. And it's hitting the shores of the United States as there's an assembly of some of my friends and others in Washington, D.C. this morning. So you may find that in short order, within the days of this week, you may find a new perception of reality inside the United States, especially among leading circles such as Congress and so forth. And where they're going to head, what's your problem? Are you in labor? No, worse, I'm in LIBOR. So let's proceed.
Okay. Well, picking up on some of the themes we've been developing over the last couple of weeks and months, we'll use, speaking of reality, we'll start from a topic which is in the domain of unreality. And it's all the talk that's been occurring over the last week or so around the hunt for the infamous Higgs boson. Now, people may have heard, they think they may have evidence of the existence of this elusive particle, the so-called God particle. Now, of course, they don't tell you which God it's a particle of, but we can leave that up to the imagination. But effectively, what you've got with the idea of the search for the Higgs boson is the attempt to fully fill out what's known as the standard model of quantum physics, which is the model which, in effect, it's an accounting model to say what are all the pieces, what are all the parts, and what are all the forces that hold the parts together. And once we have this all filled out, we now have the ability to adequately account for everything in the universe, and we can effectively extrapolate everything from the Big Bang up till now. The problem is, as we said, it's outside of reality. One, it says nothing about the directionality of processes, particularly life, particularly cognition. It assumes that all of these things are unfolding relative to a fixed space and a fixed time. And it really just ignores anything which is of a quality of creativity in the universe. It really is this Laplacian kind of idea that you have, from the moment of inception, the Big Bang, all we need to know is what were all the particles that were involved at that moment, what were all the forces involved, and we can effectively extrapolate by deduction the whole unfolding of the universe. Now, this is not to say that our understanding of what's happening at the atomic level, at the quantum level, is not important. Because as we've discussed, in fact, it's insight into what is occurring at that scale, which is going to be absolutely necessary for bringing the types of energy flux densities into the control of man, which are going to be necessary to move us out of the current crisis and move us towards our real destiny, which is in the stars. So it is absolutely crucial that we come to master processes at that level, but it's not going to come through mathematical trickery, or it's not going to come out of an accounting scheme. It's going to come out of real fundamental discovery of principle. So I think what's necessary is to really take a couple steps back to the direction of this investigation that you had during the period of Einstein and Planck, where you had a lawful collaboration developing between, on the one hand, the real classical physicists, Einstein, Planck, who themselves come out of a real classical culture, classical German culture, who were then starting to collaborate with what was emerging as the Gestalt movement, the people around Curler, Wertheimer, others, who were really investigating this principle of the mind, trying to understand what's the nature of the human mind, not as a collection of parts, not as just a firing of neurons or experiences, but from the standpoint of what are the wholes? How does the mind actually know and understand the universe? And so you had this very lawful movement towards a collaboration among these different circles. Unfortunately, it was heavily attacked. And again, by the time of the assassination of Kennedy, that movement was effectively killed. With the assassination of Kennedy, the idea of applied experimental physics went out the window. And instead, what was adopted was the whole idea of really physics became mathematical physics. It became trying to prove mathematical theory as opposed to creating experiments and saying, okay, what do these experiments tell us about, what ambiguities do we have about the real nature of the universe? And what hypotheses must we generate to account for these ambiguities? As opposed to saying, well, we have an a priori mathematical theory, let's just set up experiments that are going to prove that our theory is right. So with the death of Kennedy, like most things, that lawful direction went out the window and it was supplanted by a science that was coherent with really a monetarist system of economics. So I'd like to just give people a little bit of a flavor of what this collaboration was, of because we've brought it up before, that Planck and Curler had some kind of very special relationship that was pointing in the direction of where would be the next breakthroughs in physics, but that they would be breakthroughs in the domain of physics that would come out of an understanding of mind, an understanding of human creativity. So I'll just have a couple quotes that kind of at least give people a sense of what that relationship was and what the flavor of it was. So the first quote I have is one from Curler that was delivered in 1959 at a speech he gave in Ontario, Canada. And it was a speech on where Gestalt psychology was at that time. So after discussing his ideas of, one, what is this Gestalt approach? And then more importantly, which I think is the idea that we want to lock in on, his idea of what he called isomorphism. What he meant by isomorphism was that, for example, he was looking at things like the substrate of mind, the brain, and saying that though the brain is not the mind, what you will find is that in the substrate, you'll see certain kinds of physical characteristics which are reflections of what's occurring in the mind. And he then had a more generalized idea that all of the universe is going to have reflections of characteristics of mind. And this is what he meant by isomorphism. So the idea is that the insight we gain into how the mind works will give us insight into how physical processes work, whether at the biological level or the abiotic level. So this is this isomorphic relationship. So he's saying this idea that they were working on of approaching physics from the standpoint of Gestalt psychology was starting to gain a certain fame, a certain curiosity among certain circles.
Well, to continue with what you had talked about in the beginning about how the search for the boson reflects a view of the universe that doesn't include development as an essential characteristic of it, I think that's a key thing to look at here. When we consider what the human species does, we are a physical force. We're a physical factor. You know, gravitation, light, magnetism, properties of life, these act to shape the universe. So do we. And we do it in a way that is best seen not in a particular principle like magnetism, but as we've seen in looking at the history of evolution, where there you're able to see not just the specific biological technologies that have been introduced over time, like warm-bloodedness, internal creation of eggs, things like that, but the fact that we've had a series of them, that reflects the human species as a force in the universe, a developing force in the universe, and that's the focus we've got to take to look at economics. So if you think about the problem of looking at things as existing on their own, the problem with monetarist economics, the problem with just bad economists, compare that to looking at the value of anything in terms of a context or in terms of an objective or a mission. So the same bad approach that you'd mentioned in physics, you see today in economists who try to say that you can let the market determine the value of anything. The market has no intention. It's not human, right? It's this sort of anonymous agency that supposedly will cause good things to occur, sort of like praying to Satan or something like that. Instead, we have to create objectives as LaRouche has done, as the SDI created a total flank in the strategic situation, a new potential for development, as we have right now with NOAPA. So I wanted to take a look at what happens when we act as human beings, what occurs in the moments of discovery. Take a look at memory, the relationship between memory and discovery. If you, I think, it's been gone, I'm not going to go through it right now, the details of it, but the Meno dialogue that was written by Plato includes a actual discovery. Socrates, in a discussion with a slave boy, demonstrates geometric truth. The boy basically rediscovers this geometric truth, with some prompting by Socrates, of course, who started the whole discussion. But at the end of their discussion, the boy has a complete conviction about the truthfulness of a geometric concept that he had never thought about before. And Socrates asks, now where did that come from? Obviously, without the discussion, the boy wouldn't have thought about it, but that conviction, that ability to be certain, that was somehow part of that boy's mind already. In another dialogue with Theaetetus, in discussing whether the soul is immortal or not, Socrates takes the view that because discovery feels almost like a recollection. This is something probably everybody can relate to. When you get those aha moments, maybe not even the most profound ones, but when you realize, like you get the punchline of a joke, or you realize you were doing something totally wrong and it hits you all of a sudden, or you realize a better way of looking at things, or you solve a problem. Those ahas, you almost, afterwards, you look back and you say, how did I not see that before? Right? You got fooled by something, you made a mistake. After you make a discovery, you say, God, it's so obvious now. Because the discovery itself is actually a very simple thing. And it feels almost like a recollection. This led Socrates to say that actually our souls knew everything before birth, and that when we were born, we forgot it all. And so basically now we got to, as we go through life, we're able to sort of trigger our recollection of things that in a certain sense we already knew. Now, it's kind of tough to look at what happens with the soul at birth. So Leibniz doesn't go quite that far in his view on it, but it's very similar that there's a predisposition in our minds, in our souls, to understand principles of the universe in the same way that they actually operate. That is, the way our mind just works, the way when you get these aha experiences, these things that we can relate to emotionally, that they have the same form as the way things outside of us, seemingly, the universe, actually occur. And this has been so completely attacked over the centuries. Right now you've got it with Russell, we've got it with reductionism, that if it seems human, it must be wrong. But we've talked about that some.
And this is very beautiful material to consider, because it's the most important thing. The question is, how do we, today we've got, in Britain, we have coming to the shores of Britain today the radiation of what has emanated from a certain circle in Britain recently, which has recognized that what was being done is folly, cannot work, is rubbish, and must go. They may not be the most perfect people in the world. As a matter of fact, looking at some of their pedigrees, I would say no. But what they are is they are an oligarchical class which puts itself above the ordinary folk in a way which is both evil in one sense of trying to deceive people, mislead them, and so forth. But on the other hand, they sometimes come to the point that they have to actually expose a principle of creativity. And they suddenly abandon everything they have stood for, everything they have been committed to. Not really, but on the surface. Mm-hmm. And they say, wait a minute, we made another mistake. And then they try to keep control of society. And this is one of the aspects of the oligarchical principle, which is a highly debated thing in terms of classical Greek history and policy. You have, what is what is the power of the leaders and rulers of society of the two types, one the oligarchical and the other the ordinary mortal man. What's the difference? And what is good in that combination? And what you've got in the British now, the British leaders who have turned over on this thing, realizing that the whole system of the English-speaking world, for example, is about to go down. It's all doomed right now, unless there's a fundamental change. And the doom is coming now, not some distant point in the future, but right now. And if they don't change right now, everyone's doomed. Right now. Because the means of sustaining life, human life, is what is now in jeopardy. Is put in jeopardy by the policies which rule, for example, Europe and the United States right now. Is popular opinion is the greatest enemy of the human individual. The failure to understand what creativity is, to recognize it, and to realize that if you try to repeat what you did yesterday again and again and again, and you make all those yesterdays your tomorrow, you're doomed. And that's what's happened to us. We have consented, for the sake of popular opinion, of making our yesterdays, our accumulation of yesterdays, an alternative to a future. And we've come to a point where there is no future for us because we have used it up by neglect. And you have these Brits who are, because they are oligarchs, they look down on the condition of mankind in general. And that is regrettable and bad. But they also have the ability, to some degree, and among some of them, to see how stupid they have been. And to say, we have to agree on changing everything. Because what we've been doing won't work anymore. And we have to collect some power. We, the Brits of that time. We have to collect some power by reaching out to other likely allies. And we have to shut this whole damn thing down and restart the project. And that's where we are right now. But the problem lies in the fact that we have rendered our fellow citizens in the United States predominantly stupid, including our leaders in the Congress and so forth, because they're all going along to get along, as members of the Congress won't want to do. And therefore what we're doing is extremely important, because only those who are kicking the butt of our fellow citizens in this way, an uplifting kick in the butt which may get them to see something above the clouds, that's what's necessary. And all the problems we have with human beings, their failures, their self-destruction, is a reflection of this kind of stupidity, which has been induced in them as popular outlook, popular opinion. And mankind destroys himself with the poison called popular opinion. Yeah. Such is life and the end of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's time to go out and be unpopular then.
No, what's happening right now, we got our people out in Washington, a swarm of our people, not a very large swarm, but a swarm nonetheless. And they're out there trying to kick butt in a certain way. And what they're dealing with, they're telling messages. I got some feedback today from a few cases. They're getting people who are reacting. But I didn't know that. I didn't see that. I didn't recognize that. That's interesting. And that's the reaction we're getting. We find that leading figures, recognizable leading figures in society, in the Washington perambulation area, that they themselves have suddenly come to a realization that truth is something they really hadn't seen before. They're still groping. And that's where we stand. That's the way life often functions. That's the way society often functions. But you have to rise to recognize that sense perception is crap. As a matter of fact, that's what it's good for. For smelling crap.
Among other uses.
All right, well, that will do it for this week. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Hay dos cosas que puedes hacer ahora mismo para contribuir con esta pelea. Primero, hace una donación a través de nuestra página de contribución haciendo clic en el botón de Contribuya en la página inicial. Segundo, difundí nuestro material. Suscríbete a nuestro canal de YouTube, seguinos en Facebook y Twitter y compartí los videos con tus amigos.